All right. All right. So I think we're ready to start. Nice to see everyone. Thanks for coming. Your presence here uh, um, means a lot. And I just want you to know how grateful I am that you are here. I'm just trying to record this. Let's try it this way too. Record to the cloud. All right. So we're recording it because we're having a hard time streaming. Um, so let's get started. If you're wondering, I'm hoping to do this in 45 minutes or an hour. And and the purpose of this is to how do I put it? Purpose of this is just to give everyone a little sense of history and perspective and context for what's been happening in Israel lately. I originally this was intended to be for families, and I mean everyone's invited, of course, but families, and so I'm just going to do my best to kind of still be thinking about the fact that there might be teens watching this, um, but at the same time, reality is reality. So I think let's get started. So I've got a little presentation that I'm going to make, and at any time, if anyone wants to ask a question, just interrupt. Um, because yeah, just interrupt. So, pardon me. Let's see what I can do here. All right, so let's get started. So I do not want what that is. Oh, I see what's happening. All right, so this is my here's my picture too, just in case you're wondering. I'm still here. Hi. Okay, so what we're doing is that we want to understand the war with Hamas and understand where all this stuff comes from. And so let's just get started. So, in order to understand this, the first thing you need to do is appreciate the fact that there is um, a long, long history. Uh, and so it starts with, and by the way, I won't get too deep into the history. As you can see, my little timeline goes up to 1948 here. So it starts with, and let me do one more thing. I'm so sorry. I'm realizing I should just be more aware of anyone who's watching on the, again, I apologize. There we go. Okay, so let me just make my screen the primary screen so anyone who's watching on video, uh, sorry for not being completely prepared. There we go. Okay, so it starts with in around 1000 BCE, and that's around the time of King David. King David was the one who unified our people and was the king over all of Israel. Then a little bit later on, so we were in control of Israel from 1000 BC, if not earlier. In 586, the Babylonians destroyed the first temple and sent us into exile. We returned less than 40 years later, rebuilt the temple, and lived again. We I don't want to say we controlled, but I mean because the Persians on many levels did too, but we were in control of Israel, and Jews were living in Israel uh, in 530 BCE. Then fast forward 600 years later, and you find that the second temple was destroyed, this time by the Romans. Uh, Once the second temple was destroyed, Israel lost I mean, the Jews lost their place in at ruling Israel or in control of Israel. Uh, and as you can see, I have a couple other various different groups. Like, for example, the Byzantines controlled Israel in, the 300s, 400s, 500s, even 600s. Then the Arabs were in control. Then the Crusaders took control of Israel. By the way, Jews living in this region nonstop. Never was there a time when there weren't Jews living in Israel. Then the Mamelukes came and controlled Israel. This is for 250 years. And then in 1517, the Ottomans controlled Israel. And you might know the Ottomans as being, or as thinking of them as the Turks. And to some degree, you would be right that the Ottomans are the Turks, but what they aren't is Arabs, believe it or not. The Ottomans actually fought against the Arabs. And so the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire was in control of Israel, or that region, until 1918. And by the way, it stopped being called Israel in 586 because, well, let's call it 70. It stopped being called Israel. And then from 70 forward, it was called Palestine. So this area in this region was called Palestine. People living in this area, Jews or Arabs, were called Palestinians. And in 1918, I think it was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I, that this region was all divided up, and the British were in control of the region we now call Israel from 1918 for 30 years until 1948. So that's just kind of like an overview of the history of that region. At no point was it uniquely Arab. It was certainly uniquely Jewish for a while, but then it stopped being uniquely Jewish after the Second Temple was destroyed. And then it became a Jewish state in 1948. So let's keep going. Okay, so this is what Israel looked like at the time of the Bible, during time of King David. So that whole orange area was all considered to be Israel, was all considered to be part of the Jewish-controlled Israel. Now, that changed. At the time of King Herod, which was at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, or a little bit before, then you can see Israel shrunk and didn't include the part in the south, but did include the part in the north, and including into Syria a little bit. Now, during the time of the British Mandate, Israel increased greatly because it went all the way into Jordan. So until 1948, when you think about this region or who controlled what in the area, the British controlled all the way into Jordan. But again, all this is just a little bit of background, because now we get to 1947, and this is where things get a little bit, how do I put it? This is where we start to really get to better understand the context of what's going on. So in 1947, on the 29th of November in 1947, the United Nations voted. And they voted by a vote of 33-13 with 10 abstentions to give this land to Israel, to the Jews of Israel, and also to give the land to the Arab communities who were living there. So this is what it looked like in 1947. Oops, that's not what I wanted. This is what I want right there. This is what it looked like in 1947. The partition plan, okay? So in 1947, the idea was, so everywhere that you see dark orange, that was Jewish, allocated for a Jewish state. Anywhere where you see light kind of tan colored, that was for an Arab state. And the white, which is in Jerusalem, would be international, based upon what the United Nations agreed upon. So what that means is in 1947, as you can see, the Arabs were offered a second state alongside of Israel. I hope you understand this. So, everywhere we're talking about, two states, has to be a two-state solution, two-state solution. I agree. I'm just pointing out that it was offered to them in 1947, a complete two-state solution. And what happened in 1947? Well, I will tell you, because the Arabs refused. They refused this to be a Palestinian or an Arab state, and instead they immediately went to war. Well, they didn't immediately go to war because first we declared independence on May 14th, 1948. Why did we declare independence on May 14th, 1948? Because that was the point between. So in 1947, on the 29th of November, when the UN had a partition plan, from that point forward, that was a transition period for the British to leave the area, and the British had determined that they were going to be leaving the area on the morning of May 14th, 1948. And so that means that Israel declared independence that afternoon. Okay? So in 1948, Israel declares independence. Let's put my picture. How about up here? All right. So and then on the next day, May 15th, 1948, that was when the War of Independence broke out. So just remember that the Arabs were offered a state, but they refused, and instead what they did was they went to war with us. Now, not the Palestinians who were living or the Arabs who were living in the country at the time. Rather, we were attacked on various different sides and by various different nations. We were attacked by the Egyptians from the south. We were attacked by the Jordanians from the east, the Syrians and Lebanese from the north, and Iraq got involved in it too. So what happened was we were attacked on all sides and on all borders. And it was a really, really difficult and brutal war, to be sure. It went on for over a month, but, well, about a month rather. But in the end, as you can see by the image on the right-hand side, what happened was that Israel took actually more land than it had originally gotten in the original UN partition agreement. Because as you can see, that whereas before, and maybe what I can do is change this, it probably would have been wise if I put the two images next to each other, but I didn't, so that's okay. But let me just send this back a slide or two. Yeah, so if you can see though, if you can see that that especially in the north, well, first of all, Jerusalem is cut off from the Jewish world, from the Jewish areas. You'd have to go through the Arab areas to get to Jerusalem. That's number one. And number two is in the north, you can see there's only a little small sliver of land that you could drive through to get from the coast to the Galilee. And that's in the north. Now, so after that, though, as you can see from the right-hand image, after that, what ended up happening was that we ended up taking the land that brings us into Jerusalem, and we ended up widening the region, which would get us from the coast to the Galilee. And also, yeah, so this was what ended up happening as a result of the War of Independence. Now, let's see. So that was 1948. Oh, look, I put the wrong year on, with apologies. It shouldn't be May 15th, 1948, but the Six-Day War happened in 1967. But in the meantime, I don't know why I just left that date incorrectly, but that is what it is. So in the meantime, in the Six-Day War, as you can see on the left-hand slide, that's where we started. And then on the right-hand picture, that's like this kind of famous image of depicting the Six-Day War. But as you can see on the right-hand side, there are once again attacks from all sides from Lebanon in the green at the top, uh, to to Syria in the like brown on the top right hand corner, to Jordan on the eastern side, and of course Egypt on the southern side. And they attacked from all sides at the Six-Day War. And what ended up happening? Well, this was about as dramatic of a change, and this, on many levels, led to where we are now. So, as you can see, that on the left-hand side, that was what it looked like prior to the Six-Day War. But on the right-hand side, all of the yellow Sinai Peninsula was taken by Israel on the southern part, and that which was once Jordan now would become the West Bank, which is that light tan to the east of where you see the darker yellow of Israel. And that's what's now called the West Bank. And also, one more thing, and that is, and you can see it on the image, basically just if you look at the word on the right-hand image, if you look at the word Israel, you can see, and then you see the I in Israel. If you look up and to the left of the letter I, you see that little purple arrow, and that says Gaza. So Gaza is on the water, on the coast, on the southern part of Israel, and was taken by Israel in 1967 in the Six-Day War. I hope you're understanding. By the way, why don't I stop for a moment and give anybody a chance, if they wish, to ask any questions. So let's see what I can do here. Hold on, this, that. Anybody have any questions before I keep going? All right, good. No questions. So back to what I was saying. So this is 1967, and we're now. Let's see here. And what happens? Okay, so right after 1967, there was what's called the famous Arab Summit in Khartoum, in which Israel had offered to give back the West Bank to Jordan in exchange for peace and negotiations. And the Arab League in Khartoum said three things. They said there will be three no's, famous three no's. One was no recognition of Israel. Number two, no negotiation with Israel. Number three, no peace with Israel. The famous Arab summit in Khartoum with the three no's. Now, that, by the way, when Israel offered to give the West Bank to Jordan, that wasn't to create a Palestinian state specifically. However, it was it was still not to not have it as occupied region of Israel. So here we continue on this. So that was in 1967. There was another war in 1973 called the Yom Kippur War, which was equally as consequential, but in terms of the overall understanding of this region, I felt like I could leave that out. So so back to our little maps. We've got the map on the left-hand side, which is the map of what it looked like before before we made peace with Egypt, and on the left side, and on the right-hand side is what it looked like afterwards. So if you take a look, you can see my image is covering up, but the Sinai Peninsula, which we took in the war of the Six-Day War, which was now became Israel. We took it from Egypt. Part of the deal with Egypt was we would, in exchange for peace, we would give back the Sinai Peninsula. Now this, by the way, as a parenthetically, there's a really fascinating story about that, which I will share with you, which is that one of the people watching on our Zoom right now, and she will go nameless. However, one of the people watching on our Zoom was once married to the person who was in charge of, after the the agreement with Egypt, he was in charge, sent by America to take the various Air Force bases that were in the Sinai that we had built and rebuild them within now Israel proper. Two Air Force bases, one was called Uvda, one was called Ramon, and he built both of them with the Army Corps of Engineers. And that was part of the agreement that Israel made, was that with Egypt, was that America would rebuild these bases, and he did it. It's really kind of a great story. If anyone wants to know specifically who that is, I will let that person unmute themselves and say that she was the one who was married to that person. Stephen George West. Mary's her husband who passed away. Uh, he was the one who was sent by the United States government to rebuild two Air Force bases in Israel. It's really a remarkable story. Okay, but the back to the this presentation. So our peace with Egypt in 1979, it did give back all of the Sinai Peninsula, as you can see in this image. But what we didn't give back, or maybe said differently, what Egypt didn't want was Gaza. And once again, if you want to know where Gaza is, if you take it's one of the purple arrows, the southernmost purple arrow. It's that little strip of land along the water that borders with Egypt. So that's just an, oh, by the way, you should know that Gaza to this very day shares a border with Egypt. It is not just a thing which is about America. Anyway, so if you want a little sense of what the size of Israel relative to some things, here, let's move my picture. So that's what Israel would look like in, relative to the state of Maryland. And on the right-hand side, you can see the image of the yellow Israel amongst a huge, huge neighborhood of Arab countries. All right, so let us continue. Okay, so in 1987, there was something called Intifada. Now, Intifada is an uprising, essentially, an Arab uprising. And as a result of Intifada, this group called Hamas was founded. And Hamas, in their charter, in the charter of Hamas, it says in the preamble, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it obliterated others before it. In Article 7, it says the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. And finally, Article 32, Hamas regards itself the spearhead and the vanguard of the circle of struggle against world Zionism. Islamic groups all over the Arab world should also do the same, since they are best equipped for their future role in the fight against the warmongering Jews. Now, this is what Hamas says about Zionism and Judaism. I would say it's pretty hostile, pretty hostile. But so the founding of Hamas was in 1987. Now, 7 years later, in 1994, we had the next one of our peace treaties. So now Israel made peace with Jordan on its eastern side and Egypt on its southern side. There was actually no land given. It was just kind of deals with respect to water and other things. Now, another thing was something called the Abraham Accords. And, no matter what you think about your politics are, and we're certainly not going into Israeli politics, much less American politics, but there is no question that the Abraham Accords were a remarkable, remarkable achievement and a remarkable, remarkable thing done for Israel. There's no question. It normalized relations with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and was on the way to doing so with Saudi Arabia, which would have been the biggest, greatest thing we could do on a lot of different levels. Um, but by doing so, if we had a normalized relationship with Saudi Arabia, it really would have changed a great deal in terms of the landscape of what's going on over there, having to do with with the way that the Arab nations interact with each other. And so what happened was when Hamas attacked Israel 2 weeks ago, what that did was that forced Saudi Arabia to pick a side, and they ended up having to kind of pick a side by be more supportive of Hamas and therefore or the Palestinians living in Israel, and so therefore they needed to step away from normalizing relations with Israel. And as a result, I mean, it's such I think that ultimately that uprising or that attack really had to do with Saudi Arabia, but it's unclear. But nonetheless, the Abraham Accords happened, and now what I also want to do is tell you about this many times, uh, offers were made to the Palestinians for a Palestinian state. Okay? So when you talk about two states, by the way, and I want everyone to know, I fully, 100% believe that we need two states. Like, that is the only way to see this moving forward and peace in that area. Two states. One state for the Jewish community, one state for the Arab Palestinian community. Now, but if you are led to believe, that we never offered it, or they never, that it's always been on the table, and poor Palestinian community that they need, all they want is just to be given a Palestinian state, and Israel is depriving them of it. Well, then just look at 1947, the UN partition plan. In 1967, there was a UN Security Council which created two states. The Jarring Mission, who was a Secretary of State, I think in England, I'm not positive. The Arab Summit in Khartoum. All right, so then maybe that's an exaggeration because we didn't actually create an Arab Palestinian state. But the Alon Plan in '69, the Oslo Accords in '91, the Wye River Accords, and that's the same Wye River as right on the other side in the Eastern Shore. We had accords and offered a Palestinian state there in '98. Camp David Summit in 2000, Taba 2001, the Roadmap for Peace 2003, Sharm el Sheikh Summit in 2005. Every single one of these times a Palestinian state was offered. Every single one. And it was always refused. It wasn't a good enough deal. Or in many cases, in a few of these cases, it was agreed upon. But in the end, whether it was by terrorism or whether it was that Arafat, for example, was, feeling pressure from his extreme groups, in the end, they always turned it down. So on numerous occasions, a two-state solution was offered, and on numerous occasions, on each one of those occasions, not numerous, each one of those occasions, it was refused. Now, I want to also tell you about life in Israel. Between the years of 2001 and 2005, in 2001, there were 9 suicide bombs, which means that someone came strapped with something to detonate, and either maybe went on a bus or went into a restaurant and just blew everybody up. 9 times in Israel in 2001. In 2002, 27 times. In 2003, 12 times. In 2004, 8 times. In 2005, 8 times. But people were literally terrified. I remember 2002, terrified to leave their homes. Actually, I didn't even include 2000, which had numerous also. And so what ended up happening is as a way of dealing with these numerous suicide bombs, was we built a barrier wall in Israel. And the barrier wall was constructed along what Israel perceived of was where the West Bank was. And so every time you look at the the map of Israel, and you see kind of the West Bank and regular part of Israel. So Israel created what it believed were the lines of the boundaries and border of the West Bank, and it built a wall there. Also, in 2005, and we'll get back to that wall in a second. In 2005, Israel unilaterally left the Gaza Strip. Until 2005, we were occupying the Gaza Strip. What that means is, until 2005, we had soldiers inside Gaza, most specifically protecting Jewish neighborhoods, because there were numerous Jewish neighborhoods in Gaza, and there were settlers who wanted to live in Gaza, and partly it was because they knew they were protected by Israeli soldiers. And if you look at the map next, you'll see that all of the blue area, and remember this is a close-up detail of Gaza. All of the blue areas, those were Jewish neighborhoods in Gaza. In 2005, we disengaged, we left Gaza altogether. The army said, we're leaving Gaza. We are no longer going to be protecting anyone in Gaza, and we are going to and that meant that they were going to force the Israeli citizens and settlers out of Gaza, because if they couldn't protect them any longer, they needed to take them out. So, not to mention the fact that if part of the deal was that we were going to leave Gaza, we were going to do so altogether. Well, what ended up happening was, you probably heard this story, but the settlers left kicking and screaming. It was terrible. I mean, and immediate and they had farms and all sorts of agriculture, but immediately Hamas took the Gaza Strip, destroyed anything that had any type of Jewish history to it or memory to it, like farms or greenhouses or whatever. And within moments, and again, obviously that's a metaphor, but within moments, they started shooting rockets. So we left Gaza in 2005 with the hope that they would be ruling themselves within Gaza, and the hope was that this would kind of say, okay, let's see what we can do with this. But instead of just trying to govern themselves in a reasonable way, their first and really only instinct was to just shoot missiles and rockets immediately from Gaza. Now, this has been yet another. So there have been so many things, by the way, over the course of the years, which have made Israel feel vulnerable. So, for example, vulnerable when you have the people in Gaza who are shooting rockets with regularity, that makes people feel vulnerable, to be sure. The people who are living in the West Bank, because remember, the West Bank has all of these Arabs living in it because that was originally Jordan, but when after 1967 and then we started occupying it, it was basically an area that was Jordanian, but that was occupied by Israel. Since then, by the way, depending on the prime minister or depending on the time period, what ended up happening was that that settlers, Jewish settlers, moved into the West Bank and built communities and towns. So this is one of the first problems and first issues that the Palestinians have with Israel. So I'm just trying to be fair about things here. And that is, one of the first things is, let me just move this over here, is having to do with settlements. So settlements, when people refer to settlements, they're talking about within the West Bank. They're talking about settlements that have been built within the area that will one day, hopefully, be a Palestinian state. Now, there are two kinds of settlements. One is a big town with many Jews living in it, and they're building more just to kind of deal with the fact that the Jewish community is growing. That's one, which is less of a problem than the other, which is when kind of settlers or extremists, when they go and they just put up a little tin can with with four walls and stick a Israeli flag in it in various different parts of the West Bank and say, oh, here's a new town. So by doing so, they're suggesting that they're trying to dot the landscape with Jewish settlements to make it more complicated to create a Palestinian state. This is a problem. I don't approve of it. But nonetheless, one of the objections by the Palestinians has to do with settlements. Now, a second objection has to do with this border wall that I mentioned. Why are they objecting to, or why is the border wall problematic or and objectionable? Well, on the one hand, it's doing great because ever since 2005, it's really prevented numerous suicide bombs. Probably who knows how many. But the reason why it's a problem for the Palestinians is because Israel created a border wall on a border which Israel determined to be the border without actually having a discussion about that, right? So we established a border unilaterally. Now, again, it's not so ridiculously off base where this border is and where this wall is situated. However, still, we did it without discussing it. And for good reason, they would be upset about that. Now, another thing that they are upset about is something called checkpoints. You see, between the Palestinian territories, either the West Bank and definitely Gaza, it's not like you can just move freely. Why? Because we have been burned on numerous occasions by people who come in and just want to kill us, want to set off a suicide bomb. And so there are checkpoints, and it is hard. And the reason why it's a picture that's a dark picture with a big line, it's because that's like at dawn as people are trying to cross over to go to work for the day. But the Arab community and the Palestinian community doesn't like how hard it is for them to get into Israel to do for work and to move and to go from, like, for example, it's very hard for them to go from the West Bank to Gaza, almost impossible. And so Israel has restricted the movement of Palestinians, and that also is a legitimate problem that the Palestinians have, a legitimate gripe, in which I certainly think that restricting movement is wrong. However, part of the reason why their movement has been restricted over all this time is because, they've done bad things to us. Now, one more issue has to do with refugees. Prior to 1948, back to this was the partition plan map. There were there were Arabs who were living in what was the Jewish part of Israel, and so what happened was that Israel made it. Look, I mean, there are various different ways of seeing this, and I'm trying to be fair about it. Israel made it not easy for the Arabs to live in these Jewish areas. And so there's no question that the Arabs felt unwelcomed and unwanted. And so they left. And once they left, they weren't given the chance to come back. And that's not great. There's no question about it. I mean, I hardly believe that the Palestinians are the Jews have a fair number of stories about how we were kicked out of our homes and never allowed to come back. So they don't have a monopoly on that story, that's for sure. But I am aware that there were a fair number of Arabs who were, I don't want to say forcibly kicked out, but certainly were made, their lives were made to be one in which they felt like it would be better for them to leave. So I want to show you, this is now to kind of bring it back to kind of where we are right now. This is the rocket range from Gaza. The various different circles that you see there are have to do with the various different types of rockets that they have. The closer circles they have, that's the shorter range missile or rocket, and they have multiple ones, and that's why constantly you're hearing about these towns around Gaza being, regularly being, the alarms and the shelling and the sirens going off. But as you can also see, these rockets from Gaza can reach as far as Tel Aviv, even beyond, and Jerusalem and beyond. And they have regularly been reaching those places. And so, or at least, I mean, and fortunately for us, we've been intercepting them. So that is, I think, for at least the time being, all of my slides. I tried to give you, that was all with the intention of just background, help you understand where we've come from and why it is that we are where we are. The reason why, so to put to give a recap of the whole presentation would be just for me to say that in 1967, we took, as part of the Six-Day War, we added to our land Gaza and the Sinai. In 1978, we returned the Sinai to Egypt, but Gaza remained, and it has been a location which is it's a desperate and dense location, but it has been, so long as it was run by and the leadership was Hamas. They are. It's been their decision about how Gaza should look. There has been so much money that has been sent to Gaza in terms of aid and assistance, and with I don't want to say with regularity, but almost lockstep, the way that it's been working in Gaza is that they use the money that is sent for building infrastructure and to make life better in Gaza. Instead, all of the money that is sent to Gaza is used for one thing, and that is for missiles or rockets, and also for building tunnels underneath Gaza for the sake of either infiltrating Israel or for the sake of creating this labyrinth underground. And and further, Iran has, in the same way that Hamas, as part of its charter, is to destroy Zionism and the Jewish people, Iran has similar feelings, or at least the leadership of Iran has similar feelings, and they have used Hamas as a proxy for their belligerence against Israel. And I think that that Hamas is but one. I mean, since it's right on our border, it's a serious and imminent issue. But at the same time, I think on many levels, how do I put it? The fact is that equally important is what's going to happen with respect to Iran. So I think I've talked enough. I've talked for 45 straight minutes. So I'll give you a chance to ask any questions if you want, or thoughts if you want. But you don't have to. All right. Well, that's good. I love looking at some of the names. I haven't even looked at who's here. I'm so glad to see everybody here. And well, suffice to say, I'm glad you came, because it's important for you to listen to at least. Again, I'd like to think that I wasn't, that I was just kind of objective about it. It's possible that in me being objective, I was also being a little bit subjective, and if so, okay, I apologize, but I don't think that I'm so subjective. I think I'm little subjective, but mostly objective. I think that there are various different narratives to what's going on right now, but there's one thing is for sure, and that is that, you know, that we didn't start this fight, nor did we ask to be in this fight. We unfortunately are in this fight. there's a sense that the world expects Israel to 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 restrain itself because they see images of a poor, sad community in Gaza that is being threatened. And I certainly agree with there should never be any type of unnecessary killing or unnecessary anything. But whenever people ask about Israel and its responsibility in this war that we're in, the real question should be, why isn't anyone asking about Hamas's responsibility in this war? And the fact is that people expect Israel to do the right thing for the civilians of Gaza, but why doesn't Hamas feel that same responsibility to do the right thing for its own citizens? Because they don't. Because it's Israel's held to a standard that even the leadership of Gaza doesn't hold itself to. In any event, Jill, question. Jill Simon, you have a question. Never mind. Joe Simon. Mm-hmm. Yep. To add to that just a little bit, um, perhaps you've heard about, how Israel told everyone to leave Gaza City, and they all went down south, and then more we have now come to understand about this other border with Egypt, and about how Egypt really is limiting the number of Gazans' entry into Egypt. But what's not known is how the Hamas is also limiting the number of Gazans who can leave Gaza. And why are they doing it? Because the more who leave Gaza, the fewer people who are there for them so long as people are in Gaza and staying in Gaza, the Hamas has the capacity to continue to control them, to control the narrative that these people are communicating. But once people start leaving, they lose control of them. Not to mention the fact that they wanted when Israel said to people leave Gaza City, Hamas said no, stay in Gaza City. Why do you think they wanted to say? Because they were using them as human shields. Because because their instinct is not how do we protect our citizens, their instinct is how do we create more turmoil and more destruction and devastation. You know, the people talk about, what, I see on TV this notion of proportionality. And, oh, but, is Israel responding in proportion to what Hamas did? Well, I mean, I don't know. How do you compare beheading and raping and murdering with with precisely placed rockets. I think that it is proportional. I think it's we've shown incredible restraint, and I think, by the way, we're going to see moving forward that that it's going to get bloodier. And unfortunately, you should know that, and I share this with you, and I hope that I am wrong, but I feel like I'm right, that Hamas, the only reason why they have hostages is because they know that it might force Israel to be a little bit more careful in the way that it undertakes its missions. Um, if they have, because so long as we think they're hostages in one place or another, then maybe we won't be as quick to destroy this area or to bomb this area. But ultimately, Hamas does not care if these hostages live or die. That is for sure. And so, the you know, unfortunately, I think that there's going to be a lot of sad and bad news coming from Gaza in the next couple weeks, and I just hope that there is a little bit of good news that comes in along with the bad. All right. I thank you all for listening. Oh, Mark, go ahead. They did. Right. Right. So what's important to note in all this is that Saudi Arabia and Iran are enemies. They created some sort of normalization agreement 6 months ago, but the reality is that they are enemies. Okay, so what happened was that the closer Saudi Arabia gets with Israel, the worse it is for anyone like Iran or Syria or Lebanon that is opposed to Israel and the strengthening of Israel. Because creating a relationship, a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia is the strongest country in the region, and so therefore that would just legitimize Israel. Now, if something which it's not, it's almost legitimized and recognized in that region, but not quite. And if Saudi Arabia did so, that would be the coup de grace. Now, if so, what Iran did when they saw that relationship speeding up and intensifying was Iran, by having doing this massacre by Hamas, what it did was is it forced Saudi Arabia to pick a side. Are they pick? They're not picking a side with Iran. Rather, they're picking a side with their Arab brothers and sisters versus Israel. And the leadership of Saudi Arabia may have been thinking to themselves, it makes a whole lot more sense for us to just pick the side and of Israel, but they knew that that would be that who knows what that would mean within the borders of Saudi Arabia, if there would be great dissent and problems with making that decision. And so therefore what they did was they came out and supported the Palestinians, the Arabs, or Hamas in this, or at least they didn't support Israel. And in doing so, that was why Iran was successful in kind of sabotaging and thwarting this plan to normalize relations with Saudi Arabia. It is a huge part of it. It's a huge part of it. Carol, I think I see your hand up. Go ahead. But you'll unmute yourself. Nope, Carol, you're still muted. All right, let's see. Not quite. We're still working on it. I wonder if I can do it for you. Ask to unmute. All right. I think we're gonna. Sorry, Carol, but we're gonna call it a day. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this with me, and I wish you all the best.